is Dr. Hossain Danesh, who has been introduced to you briefly this morning, but Hossain deserves at least 2 introductions, if not 3 or 4. So I'd like to introduce him again and explain to you a little bit of his background and why he's addressing us on this important subject. Hossain Danesh was really the guiding spirit behind the creation, the founding of the Association for Baha'i Studies. And I think that those of us in Canada who have benefited from it, and those in the States and other parts of the world now, appreciate the initiative which he and some of his colleagues undertook to bring this into being. He's served since its creation, well, as the father and the mother, the servant and the slave of the association, and several other functions which probably shouldn't define too closely. He has found himself doing many things, but he's done it with great spirit and with great energy. And I think that's one of the things that I always remember when I think of Hossain's activities in Canada and elsewhere in the world, is the creative energy, the imagination, which he brings to his activities and to his service of the faith. But a lot of people have creative energy and imagination, but not everybody has the spiritual sensitivity which he brings to it. The way in which he combines that with his own deep knowledge of the faith and with the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And this is something which we are privileged to share in Canada and which we will be sharing this afternoon. And we hope to continue to share that in many ways. And some of the ways in which we're going to share that are in some future publications which he is working on. I'd like to mention them because I think you'll be interested in them. And if I mention them now, it will make it sure that he'll get them finished and published and in our hands even sooner. He's working on 3 books now. One called The Integrated Self, one called The Healthy Marriage, and one very interesting one called The Mysterious Case of the IWs, which is a book on death for children. Also, there is, in a sense, a sequel coming to the well-known monograph he did on a violence-free society. It's called Building a Violent-Free Society, a Challenge for Youth. So in these efforts, I think we can share more of his creative activity as it applies to our growing as a Baha'i community and to our own insights about our spiritual origins and about the needs of the age in which we live, to which much of his work is addressed, both in his professional life and as a Baha'i. So it's my privilege now and pleasure to introduce Dr. Hossain Danesh.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I hope that one of these days I also make you kind of feel embarrassed in front of large audience. I shall try to do my best. The topic that I like to focus on here is the process of integrating the social and individual change, attempting to show that the two of them indeed are inseparable and they have to go hand in hand and be totally interrelated. In all living organisms, there is a constant condition of change. The living organisms, they either grow or decay. There is no other condition that can characterize a living organism. In human beings, the process is more complex because while on the one hand, we are engaged in the process of aging, growth, physical growth, and then aging. On the other hand, the individual human being is always spiritually, as far as his intellectual capacities, as far as his emotional capacities, and definitely as far as his spiritual dimension, is on the ascendancy and in a process of an ongoing development and growth. Now, if we look very closely at the process of change, we will see that every change is characterized, on the one hand, in the form of a death from one state of a being and birth to another state of a being. This time, a higher state, as far as the healthy growth of individual human being is concerned. What I'd like to do with you, therefore, here is to share, first of all, in a very cursory manner, but I think is necessary, some of the prevailing concepts about the process of cultural change. And I have decided that to do this through show of some slides, because it would make it visually somewhat easier for you to see what I'm trying to say in that process. After we have done that, I'd like to show you also through the slides some concepts, prevalent concepts about man and his world. The way that the paradigms, models are shifting about what we think about ourselves and our world. And finally, then I'd like to share with you thoughts that I have about integration of the processes of change, for both from the individual and the collective basis, from the Baha'i perspective. So these are the three things that we will do. So I'd like to start showing some slides for you. And it should be mentioned that these slides, people who are in the back, they would not be able to read it, but I would read it here loudly, so we all are in the same boat. And also, if you want to sleep, you would be able to now. I thought about that. I don't know why the one side of the slide is dark. If anything can be done, please do it. But anyway, it's called The Views on Civilization, the Forces of Cultural Change. And I have identified the source, the process, and the characteristics. The first view of social change, cultural change, that I have identified here comes from the I Ching, or the ancient book of change, which is prevalent in Chinese culture. According to this concept, the cultural change is a continuous, cyclical fluctuation involving the opposing poles of the yin and the yang. I would describe these processes later, which underlie the fundamental rhythms of the universe. If we see the universe and the cultural change according to this process, the characteristic that would emerge is that there is a cyclical pattern of change seen not only in the culture, but in all developments of the universe. In other words, everything goes through a cyclical process, similar, let's say, to the seasons of the year and so forth. Now, the second area, the second concept that we can focus on are the concepts that historians, especially the Western historians in general, have concluded through the study of history. They say that all civilizations go through similar cyclical processes of genesis, growth, of breakdown, and disintegration. Therefore, every civilization goes through this process, and therefore you have the rise and fall of civilizations in a seemingly disjointed manner. Then if we move from that to a more specific process, for example, Toynbee identifies the pattern of challenge and response. Challenge is from the natural or social environment, and response is in the form of a creative response from a small minority for a new civilization. Here we have somehow a similar idea to that described by Dr. Laszlo, but of course Dr. Laszlo put it in a much more comprehensive manner. And from the Toynbee perspective, therefore, the characteristic that we see as far as cultural change is rise and fall of civilization in a seemingly disjointed manner once again. Then if we move from there to Hegel, we would see that he identifies a very interesting process, a spiral development from one form of unity to a phase of disunity and then to reintegration on a higher level. So according to this process, we could identify that some of the things that are happening in our society right now is the time when the phase of disunity is in its process. And here, of course, the characteristic of the cultural change is that of an ongoing and advancing process of human civilization. Now, Marx took this concept and adopted Hegel's philosophy and formulated the concept that change results from a dialectic interplay of opposites arising from contradictions that are intrinsic in all things. Somehow he takes Hegel's idea and also somehow the concept of I Ching once again manifests itself here in this Western way of thinking. And the outcome of the characteristic of this cultural change is class conflict and struggle and the need for violent revolution to bring about change. Now, if we move from there to another prevalent concept, that of social Darwinism, which sees the social evolution coming about as a result of a struggle, conflict, competition, survival of the fittest. The characteristic of such a cultural change is the competition, is a power struggle, and survival of the fittest. And I decided to very briefly to put the Baha'i concept here. The Baha'i concept has been already described. Dr. Laszlo mentioned that, and a number of other speakers, Dr. Macy, Dr. Banani. The process is this, the process of change or processes of change associated with the stage of maturity inevitable in the life of the individual have their counterparts in the collective life of mankind. This is, of course, Shoghi Effendi. Therefore, we could conclude that human societies, like individual human beings, traverse the stages of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. We are now in the adolescent phase. We are fast approaching the adulthood. The characteristic of this view of cultural change is that we see there being an ongoing process of human civilization on both the material and the spiritual spheres in an organic and integrated manner in response to the scientific, artistic, and cultural developments on the one hand, and the spiritual renewal of mankind through progressive revelation on the other hand. As you know, the concept of progressive revelation is a central concept in the Baha'i faith. And it focuses on the reality that as human beings evolve and grow, God's guidance to mankind is renewed according to the needs of humanity at that time. Now, of course, this is a very cursory review, but nevertheless, it gives us a glimpse of the ways that we have been thinking about cultural change. Let's now focus on the ways that we think about the human being, man and his world, and to see how the paradigms, the models shift. Now, here, the first one again, we go back to the I Ching to see how the I Ching focuses on man and his world, what kind of a model and paradigm it is. I have identified three of its characteristics. One, the ultimate essence of reality, according to I Ching, Tao, reality meaning Tao, is characterized by cyclical patterns in all developments of nature. Number two, yin and yang are the two polar opposites which set the limits for the cycles of change. Yin and yang do not have moral values. What is bad or harmful is the imbalance between them. And finally, the polar opposites of yin and yang and the cyclical patterns of development are applicable to man and nature alike. So, this kind of a view of man and his world results in a kind of a society and human life that could be again described in three ways. First, there is a constant fluctuation in all creation, universe. A back and forth process, a circular, not a progressive process. The yang, having reached its climax, retreats in favor of the yin. The yin, having reached its climax, retreats in favor of yang. Then some of the characteristics of the yin and yang should be identified. Yin is identified with feminine characteristic, contractive, responsive, cooperative, intuitive, and yang, masculine, expansive, aggressive, competitive, rational. There are others. And finally, this whole orientation views man as in a relatively comprehensive manner, taking into account biopsychological and ecological aspects of human reality. Now, this is one paradigm. There is another paradigm. This is the current dominant Western world paradigm, which is based on Cartesian, Newtonian concepts. Now, it is characterized by scientific method is the only valid approach to knowledge. That's number one. Number two, universe is a mechanical system composed of elementary material building blocks. Number three, life in society is a competitive struggle for existence. Number four, unlimited material progress through technological and economic growth is desirable. Number five, man is an animal emerging from the evolutionary process through random mutation and the survival of the fittest. As I read, I'm sure you identify different schools of thoughts and so forth with these issues. Number five, man is a machine and or an animal whose behavior could and should be programmed and or manipulated, which is in the behavioristic psychology. Number six, man is an animal governed by two powerful instincts, the sexual instinct and the aggressive instinct, which is Freud. And then this whole concept views the superiority of man over women is deeply ingrained in this paradigm. And I found a marvelous quote by Charles Darwin He says, man is more courageous, pugnacious, and energetic than women, and has more inventive genius. How about that? So we should keep his ideas going for a while longer. Now, what happens with this kind of a concept? What are the results of these kind of a concepts? What kind of a world and view of ourselves we have? The first one, this kind of a view deals with man as an animal or a machine. Secondly, materialistic views of all aspects of life of humanity is the predominant approach to life. Materialism predominates. Number 3, alienation of people from one another is considerable due to competition, power struggle, etc. Number 4, destruction of human habitat by focus on unlimited material progress is immense. Number 5, development of manipulative technology designed to control and dominate people is greatly encouraged. And number 6, there is a total disregard for the spiritual nature of man and all that it implies. Now, I wish to share a third paradigm. Here we are talking about the systems paradigm. This is one of the most exciting developments that we have had in the intellectual contributions of a number of really major minds of our time in trying to understand the world in a different manner. And of course, we had one of the prominent and world-renowned thinkers in this field, Dr. Laszlo, today. Now, I'm kind of uncomfortable to say anything about it because he knows much more than I do, but nevertheless, that's okay. He would correct me later. The first one is that systems view of life is based on awareness of the essential interrelatedness and interdependence of all phenomena, physical, biological, psychological, social, and cultural. And this I have taken from Capra. Number 2, in the systems theory, an integrated whole whose properties cannot be reduced to those of its parts is called a system. Living organisms, like human beings, societies, and ecosystems, ecological systems, are all systems in this definition. Therefore, when we are defining a system, it's very important to understand what is it that we are talking about. I just read it once more. In the systems theory, an integrated whole whose properties cannot be reduced to those of the parts is called a system. Number 3, systems theory differentiates the machine from the organisms. And it forces us, demands from us that we look at ourselves and our world in an organic manner rather than in a mechanistic manner. Then, just think for a moment, if we think of machines, machines are constructed, they are inflexible, they are bound to the rules of cause and effect, they deteriorate. Organisms are exactly the opposite. They grow, they are flexible, they have a feedback loop mechanism, they organize themselves, self-organization and self-renewal. Finally, one other dimension that I identified here is that systems theory repudiates the view that man is a machine or an object. Rather, it views man as a living organism with consciousness, who is an integrated part of the ecosystem along with other living organisms and inanimate objects. So the whole thing becomes integrated in one large way of looking, organic way of looking at creation. Now, what are some of the consequences of looking the world and ourselves in this way? The first one is, however, a very important statement by Capra, namely that he says at the present time there is no well-established framework, either conceptual or institutional, that would accommodate the formulation of this new paradigm, the systems theory. I like to put forward that the Baha'i faith does exactly that. And this is something that we Baha'is have to really be able to prove rather than just to state it. Is a major task before us in that respect. Number two, in this situation, Capra says, the best approach is to gradually formulate a network of interlocking concepts and models, and at the same time developing the corresponding social organizations. So already there are a lot of thinking in the world of how we can start not only change our way of thinking about ourselves and our world, but about creating new systems, new institutions that would function in the same manner. Number three, systems theory integrates in its formulations the new insights gained from recent advances in the sciences of physics and biology, and acknowledges the reality of human mind and consciousness and its influence on the interrelationship with the material reality. I cannot go into description of that because it's a very lengthy process by itself. Finally, I came across a quote that I found the most illuminating and extremely close to the Baha'i concept of the world. And the quote is this: there is a progression from multiplicity and chaos to oneness and order, by Erwin Laszlo. Now, I have been going very fast through these processes, trying to see whether we could see some similarities with another paradigm, the Baha'i paradigm. The Baha'i paradigm says that one, man is created a noble and a spiritual being for the dual purposes of knowledge and love of God through the processes of self-knowledge and service to mankind. Number two, mankind collectively goes through the stages of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Number three, at the present time, we are approaching the stage of adulthood. We are in the adolescent phase. Number four, there is a fundamental unity in all creation. Number five, science and religion are totally harmonious through science and through religion. And number six, the true equality of man and woman is a reality. We have to practice it. Now, some byproducts, results of this way of thinking is that the Baha'i faith provides a formula for an integrated life, allowing optimal growth of the person's cardinal human characteristics of knowledge, love, and will in a complete harmony with the dynamics of his inner life and the requirements of his society alike. This is what I'm going to talk about for the remaining few minutes. And number two, Baha'i faith has created in the form of Baha'i World Community a prototype of a universal, integrated, and organic world community of mankind, characterized by unity, justice, and peace. And an ever-advancing civilization. Once again, one of the tasks that we have is to define and describe the Baha'i world community to the world in such a way that they would see indeed what is happening, because this is one of the most exciting development projects that you possibly could think of, the development of the Baha'i community throughout the world. Now, having said this, I'd like to preamble the next part of my talk by saying that human beings, the spiritual nature of human beings, has at least 3 characteristics. When we talk of human soul in the Baha'i concept, from Baha'i perspective, we are talking about the qualities of knowledge, of love, and of will. Those are the 3 qualities that are uniquely human qualities. Those are the qualities that differentiate us from the animals. We are not differentiated from animals by our body. We are differentiated by animals through our knowledge, through our love, and through our will. Those are the processes that makes a human being a human being. The second issue that we have to keep in mind is that as human beings, at all times, we have 3 universal concerns. All human beings share 3 universal concerns. First, we are concerned about ourselves. We always ask ourselves, how am I doing? How am I feeling? I think I'm doing all right, or I made a goof here, or I succeeded there. We are thinking about ourselves and concerned about ourselves all the time. Then comes concerns about others, concerns about relationships. We say, how am I doing in relationship to my parents, my spouse, my children, my siblings, my friends, my world, and so forth. We are concerned about relationships. And the third concern that we have as human beings is the concern about time. The concern about time is a profound concern, and usually it functions at a subconscious level, and even in some respects at the unconscious level, than the concerns about ourselves and about our relationships. Because we are going to die, we are concerned about time. And that's the reason that we are saying here, by year so and so, by year 2000, are we going to be here or aren't we going to be here? So the concerns about self, others, and time are totally human concerns, and they are universal. So what I like to do, from a progressive perspective, to see how these concerns and the human characteristics of knowledge, love, and will function. Because if we do that, then we can integrate the processes of social change and individual change. Here I have identified cardinal human qualities of knowledge, love, and will, and the major existential concerns of self, of others, and of time. Now, at the level of the relationship between the knowledge and self, at the earliest level of growth, children, they become aware of their knowledge through self-experience. They experience themselves. Then gradually, as they evolve, their knowledge becomes that of self-discovery. An infant has a dim knowledge of himself because he gets hungry. A 2-year-old has a greater level of knowledge of himself because he discovers himself, that he has fingers and he can walk, he can talk, and so forth. The third level, which is a much higher level, is self-knowledge. It is something that all of us are trying to achieve. If we put that in the next level, namely the relationship between love and self, the first, the most elementary one, is self-preoccupation. The infant is totally self-preoccupied. He is the center of the universe. The universe is him, in fact. Then he moves from the level of self-preoccupation to the childhood and adolescent and early adulthood stages in which gradually he accepts himself. You know, we are talking about identity and having poor identity and this and that, meaning we don't accept ourselves. The whole of humanity is going through problems of self-acceptance, because how could you accept yourself as a machine or as an animal? It is impossible. And then the final stage of the growth in that process is self-growth or development, is when you free yourself from really yourself. You transcend that level. Then going to the area of will, at the earliest level, we learn self-control. Then we learn self-confidence. Then eventually we learn responsibility. You see how this is developmental and how it can apply to you as an individual or to the human societies and so forth. Then we go from knowledge and others, concern about others. The first glimpses of knowledge that we have about others is that all people are the same. Children don't differentiate at the earliest level between themselves and others. They are all the same. Even adolescents try to be the same. The second one is the uniqueness of people. We gradually become aware that people are unique rather than same. And then we move from that level to the next level, which is oneness of people. So this is the processes that we have to go through. As far as love is concerned, we first go through the acceptance of others, then we develop empathy, then we arrive at the stage of unity. As far as will is concerned, first we are in a stage of competition, then we go to a stage of musavat. You know, Baha'u'llah uses 2 words in his writings. The first one is musavat, which means equality and cooperation. And the next one, the final stage in that development, is mubasat, which is preferring others over yourself. Then finally, there is an integration of time and knowledge. As far as time and knowledge, at the earliest level, we are preoccupied with here and now. Then we become preoccupied about mortality. We are going to die. And then finally, we become aware of immortality, the spiritual dimension of ourselves. As far as love, we first have a kind of a coming together, which we are united, but we don't know each other, and we don't know ourselves. Then comes a time of separation, of individuation. We become aware of our uniqueness. And then we become united at a higher level. And finally, as far as will and time is concerned, at the earliest level, our will shows itself through desire. At the next level, we make decisions. at the final level, we put those decisions into actions. Well, unfortunately, we have gone past the time that we have allotted for this time. However, I'd like to say one final word. This was a very complex and complicated statement here, but I tried to show that the process of development is a methodical process. The process of change is methodical. It is intellectual and spiritual at the same time, and it is progressive in its nature, and we could identify individually and collectively where we are and where we are heading. Because as it was suggested, we have to prepare ourselves for this coming of the age of mankind. And we cannot prepare ourselves unless we know where we are going. Thank you very much.